Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I'm not someone who normally believes in the paranormal, let alone aliens, but something happened a few weeks ago that I can't explain, and it's starting to feel like I've become part of something way bigger and way scarier than I ever imagined. It all started on a random Friday night. Me and my friends, Jake, Tommy and Emily, were bored out of our minds. You know how it goes. We were looking for something new, something different to do. That's when Emily brought up the idea of using a Ouija board. Now, I've always heard stories about those things, but I didn't take them seriously. It's just a board game, right? But Emily swore up and down that it could actually work, and since none of us had a better idea, we figured why not. Jake had an old Ouija board lying around from his grandmother's attic, so we decided to use that one. I remember it looked ancient, the wood worn and the letters faded, as if hundreds of hands had touched it before ours. That should have been the first red flag, but I shrugged it off, thinking it added to the creepy vibe we were going for. We set it up in Jake's living room. Candles, dim lights, the whole spooky aesthetic. As soon as we sat down around the board, the atmosphere changed. There was this heaviness in the air, like something was watching us, waiting. We laughed it off, calling it nerves, but deep down, I could tell we were all feeling it. We started by asking the usual questions. Is anyone here with us? Can you give us a sign? You know, the typical stuff you see in horror movies. At first, nothing happened, which just made us laugh even more. Tommy even made some dumb joke about ghosts being lazy. But then, the planchette moved. I swear on everything, none of us were touching it hard enough to push it. It started slow, sliding across the board until it settled on yes. We all stared at each other, wide-eyed. I thought someone was messing with us, but the look on their faces told me they were just as freaked out as I was. That's when things got weird, really weird. Instead of asking something cliché like, "Who are you?" Tommy blurted out, "Are you from this planet?" The planchette jerked, almost violently, toward the letters. It spelled out something none of us expected. No. At first, we thought it was just a joke, or maybe a trick of our minds. But when we asked it to clarify, the board started spelling out words faster than any of us could keep up with. The message, whoever or whatever we were communicating with wasn't human, and it claimed to be something far beyond what we could understand. Emily started panicking, wanting to stop, but Jake, being the curious one, pushed forward, asking more questions. That's when the board started to describe things none of us could possibly know, details about the stars, about places on Earth that no one had ever mentioned in our group before. It kept saying one word over and over, Watcher. What's a watcher? Jake asked. Alien spirit, the board spelled out. I felt my heart racing. This wasn't funny anymore. It felt like something was happening that was beyond our control. Emily was practically shaking, begging us to end it. But before we could even think about saying goodbye properly, the planchette slid to a word we hadn't seen before. Erase. Erase. What did that even mean? Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from upstairs, like someone had kicked a door open. We all jumped, our nerves on edge. Jake immediately stood up and ran upstairs to check it out. When he came back, his face was pale. There was no one there, but he swore he heard whispering. That was enough for me. We decided to end the session right then and there. We packed the board away, thinking that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That night, I had the strangest dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. I saw something, like a bright light, hovering over my bed. It wasn't a normal light either. It was blinding, but soft at the same time, if that makes any sense. In the light, I saw what looked like shadows, figures moving around me, watching. When I woke up, I felt different. Not scared, but off, like something had changed inside me. I brushed it off as sleep paralysis, but when I texted the group the next morning, Jake, Tommy, and Emily all said they had similar experiences. That's when we realized we might have messed with something we shouldn't have. And then, strange things started happening in real life. For the next few days, we noticed black vans parked near our houses, no matter where we went. People we didn't recognize seemed to be watching us from across the street, at the coffee shop, even outside our school. It was Jake who first suggested the unthinkable. What if they're trying to make us forget? At first, it sounded ridiculous. Who would want to erase our memories? But as the days went by, more and more things didn't add up. Conversations we had the day before felt distant, foggy, like they happened years ago. I couldn't even remember what we had for lunch the previous day. Then one night, Tommy sent us a message in our group chat. "Guys, I don't think I'm safe anymore. I think they're coming for me tonight." We all rushed over to Tommy's house, but when we got there, it was like he had vanished into thin air. His parents said he had gone on a trip, but we knew something was wrong. There was no way he'd just leave like that without telling us. Someone, was making people disappear. And I think we're next. When Tommy disappeared, it wasn't just like he'd gone off the grid. It was as if he'd never existed at all. His social media accounts were wiped clean, his text to us disappeared, and his number went straight to voicemail. It was eerie, like someone had gone to great lengths to erase every trace of him. Even his parents acted strange, like they didn't fully remember their own son. They smiled, made excuses for him being gone, but there was something hollow behind their eyes, like they were reciting lines they didn't fully understand. None of it made sense. Jake, Emily, and I were shaken to the core, but we couldn't let it go. We knew something had happened to Tommy, but the more we talked about it, the more we began to forget the details ourselves. It was like every time we tried to recall what he looked like, or his favorite things, the memories slipped through our fingers like water. I remember sitting in my room late that night, going through my phone, scrolling through old photos. I was desperate to find proof, anything that would remind me of Tommy, but every picture that should have had him in it didn't. It was like someone had edited him out, leaving blank spaces where he should have been. A chill ran down my spine as I realized there was nothing. No photos, no texts, no voice messages. It was like we were being wiped too. I called Jake. "Do you have anything? Anything at all that shows Tommy was real?" "No." Jake's voice sounded distant, hollow. "It's like he was never here, but we know he was. I remember him, even if I can't prove it." Emily wasn't taking it well. She'd been quiet since that night, barely responding to our texts. When we finally met up, I could see it in her eyes. She was unraveling. She kept saying she felt like there was something inside her head, pulling strings, like her memories weren't her own anymore. Then she dropped a bombshell. "I've been having these flashes, dreams maybe, or visions," she whispered, looking over her shoulder as if someone might be watching. "It's like someone's doing something to us. Every time I fall asleep, I see these bright lights, and I hear voices like they're inside my head, rearranging things, making me forget." I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was going too far. Whatever we had done with that Ouija board, it wasn't just some creepy game. It had opened something, and now it felt like someone, or something, was actively trying to cover it all up. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with the idea of our memories being tampered with, of Tommy being erased from our lives. I needed to clear my head, so I went for a drive, hoping to shake the creeping paranoia. That's when I saw it. The black van. It was parked at the end of my street, just sitting there with its headlights off. I'd seen it before, outside Jake's house, near Emily's work, but I never thought too much of it. Now though, it felt like a sign. Someone was watching us. I stopped my car a few houses down and stared at the van, my heart pounding in my chest. I could almost feel eyes on me, but the windows were tinted, so dark I couldn't see inside. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture. Maybe this was the proof we needed. Before I could take the shot, the van's headlights flicked on, flooding the street in harsh white light. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed my car into gear and sped away, my mind racing as fast as my heart. I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the van's headlights grow smaller in the distance. When I finally got home, I called Jake again. "They're watching us. I saw the van." "You think it's them?" Jake's voice was low, shaky. "Who else could it be? Tommy's gone, and now they're trying to erase us too." That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified, every creak, every gust of wind outside my window. I kept expecting to hear footsteps in the hall, or see shadows moving under my door. The next day, we decided to meet up at Jake's place to talk things through. Emily was late, which wasn't like her. When she finally showed up, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was messy, her eyes bloodshot. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," she muttered, sitting down and rubbing her temples. "I keep hearing whispers. I can't tell if it's real or if I'm losing my mind." Jake and I exchanged worried glances. This wasn't normal. None of this was. But how were we supposed to stop it? Who could we even go to? We couldn't exactly tell the police, "Hey, the government's trying to erase our memories because we talked to an alien spirit on a Ouija board." We decided to test something we hadn't tried yet. We wanted to see if we could force ourselves to remember. Jake grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything we could recall about Tommy. The way he laughed, his favorite food, the nickname we used to call him. It was hard though, like pulling teeth. Every detail we tried to write down felt fuzzy, distant, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. But we managed to get a few things down on paper. Then we waited. 2 days later, I checked the notebook. It was blank. Not just the page where we had written about Tommy, but the whole thing. Every single page had been erased, like it had never existed. We were running out of time. And we were running out of memories. Things only got worse after that. Every day, more pieces of our lives started to fade. Not just memories of Tommy. No, it was like everything was being carefully wiped. Like someone was erasing us piece by piece. I'd wake up in the morning and have no idea what I did the day before. I'd look at old photos and recognize the places, but not the faces, as if my life was becoming a blurred canvas. Jake tried to keep a grip on reality, but even he was slipping. Emily, she was almost gone. She stopped coming to our meetups entirely, stopped answering texts. It was like she was slowly dissolving from our lives, just like Tommy had. One night, Jake showed up at my house, unannounced, his eyes wide and frantic. "They've been in my house," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know how, but I know they've been there." I let him in, locking the door behind us. "What do you mean? What happened?" He collapsed onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. "I found footprints, wet footprints, in my bedroom." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "Are you sure? Could it have been, I don't know, from the shower or something?" Jake shook his head, his expression haunted. "I haven't showered in days, man. I'm telling you, someone's been in my house. I woke up and there were these muddy, wet footprints leading from the window to my bed." I didn't know what to say. This was getting out of hand. The idea that someone could just break into Jake's house without him noticing, leave those prints, and walk away without taking anything. It felt like we were spiraling deeper into a nightmare. But the worst part, I believed him. It wasn't just Jake's paranoia. I'd started noticing little things too. Things in my own house seemed out of place, like they'd been moved. I'd come home from work to find doors open that I knew I'd closed, or lights left on when I was sure I'd turned them off. It was subtle at first, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I turned around, It felt like there were eyes just out of sight, hiding in the shadows. "I don't think it's just the government," Jake muttered, his voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing at the windows, as if afraid someone might be listening. I think they aren't human." I didn't laugh. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Something about the way Jake said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made my skin crawl. "You remember what the Ouija board said?" Jake continued, his eyes darting around the room. "About the Watcher. What if that wasn't just some alien spirit? What if that thing is real, and now it's here? What if it's erasing us?" The thought sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded crazy, sure, but after everything we'd been through, it didn't feel that far off. We'd messed with something we didn't understand, something far bigger than us. And now, whatever it was hunting us down, making sure we couldn't remember. I thought about Tommy, about how he'd been wiped from existence. I thought about Emily, slowly vanishing like a ghost. And now Jake was next. Hell, I was next. That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. It didn't matter though. No matter how many precautions I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already inside, lurking in the dark, waiting for the right moment to erase me. I woke up to a strange sound. At first I thought I was dreaming, but the noise persisted. A low, mechanical hum, like something vibrating deep beneath the floorboards. I lay there, frozen in place, straining to hear where it was coming from. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of the house settling. This was different, unnatural. Then I saw it. A flicker of light under the door. I shot up, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was still closed, the chair still wedged against it. But the light, it wasn't coming from the hallway, it was coming from the other side. I stood there, trembling, staring at the glow. It wasn't the yellowish light of a lamp, but something brighter, colder, almost surgical, like the sterile glow you'd see in a hospital room. Slowly, I moved closer, trying to make sense of it. The hum grew louder. As I reached for the door, my hand shaking, the light abruptly flickered off. Just gone, like it had never been there in the first place. The hum stopped too, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I yanked the chair out of the way and flung the door open. Nothing. The hallway was pitch black, quiet, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jake called. His voice was shaky, almost panicked. "Emily's gone." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What do you mean, gone?" "Her parents said she went to stay with relatives, but they couldn't tell me where. I tried calling her, but her number's disconnected. It's like she's vanished." We were running out of time. Jake and I met up at a diner later that day, desperate to figure out what to do. It was clear now, we were being targeted. Whether it was the government, aliens, or something else entirely, we didn't know. But we had to do something before it was too late. "I don't think we're going to survive this," Jake whispered, staring down at his untouched coffee. "Not if we keep waiting." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing research," he said, glancing around the diner nervously. "There's a place that might have answers. I found it on some old forum, buried deep in the dark web." I felt a chill run through me. "What kind of place?" "A facility, off the grid. People say it's where they experiment on memory erasure, where they take people like us, and make sure no one ever hears from them again." My stomach twisted. "You really think that's where they're taking Tommy and Emily?" Jake nodded. "If we go there, maybe we can stop this. Maybe we can save them." I didn't know what scared me more. The idea that we were being hunted by something inhuman, or the fact that Jake was right. Whatever was happening, we couldn't just sit and wait to disappear. We decided we had to go to the facility. It was our only shot at getting answers. or, at the very least, finding out what happened to Tommy and Emily. There was this growing sense that the clock was ticking, and if we didn't do something soon, we'd be erased too. The thought of just disappearing, of no one even remembering we existed, terrified me more than anything else. Jake had found the location deep on some forgotten corner of the dark web. It was buried under layers of encrypted nonsense, and even finding it seemed like a risk. The address was vague, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, a stretch of desolate road surrounded by woods, the kind of place no one would go unless they had a death wish. That weekend, we packed our things and drove out there. The ride was tense, mostly silent. Every so often, Jake would mutter something about how this was a mistake, but we both knew we didn't have a choice. The further we drove, the less familiar everything became. It felt like we were leaving the world behind, entering some hidden part of reality that wasn't meant for us. When we finally reached the road the directions had pointed us to, it didn't even look like a road. More like a dirt path, winding through a dense, shadowy forest. No signs, no markers, just trees that seemed to press in on all sides. We parked the car at the edge of the woods, not wanting to get too close. There was a suffocating quiet that hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I half expected to see the black van lurking in the distance, but there was nothing, just us and the creeping sense of dread. We walked for what felt like hours. The deeper we went, the thicker the forest became, and the darker it seemed to get, even though it was still early afternoon. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see something moving in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just that same eerie silence. Finally, we reached it. The facility wasn't what I expected. It wasn't some high-tech government building with guards and surveillance cameras. No, this was something much older, much creepier. It looked abandoned, an old, crumbling structure hidden deep in the woods, like it had been forgotten by the world. The windows were broken, the walls covered in vines. But I could feel it, deep in my bones. This was the place. Whatever had happened to Tommy and Emily, it had started here. Jake and I stood at the entrance, staring at the rusted metal door. "You ready for this?" he asked, though I could tell by his voice that he wasn't. "Not even close," I muttered, but we didn't have a choice. We pried the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and decay. The hallways were narrow, lined with flickering overhead lights that barely cut through the gloom. Every step we took echoed through the empty corridors, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. There was a presence, something watching us from the darkness. We didn't talk much as we made our way through the facility. There was no need. The further in we went, the more the place felt wrong, like we were walking through a nightmare. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols I didn't recognize. Some of them looked almost alien. The deeper we went, the louder the hum became. The same hum I'd heard under my floor that night. I could feel it vibrating through my body, rattling my teeth. Then we found the room. It was large, much larger than the others we'd passed. In the center, there was a massive machine, something that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie, all blinking lights and cold metallic surfaces. The air around it seemed to pulse with energy. But what really caught my attention were the chairs. 4 of them, lined up in a row, facing the machine. And in one of them was Emily. I froze. She was strapped in, motionless, her head slumped forward. My heart raced as I rushed over to her, frantically trying to free her from the restraints. "Emily! Emily, wake up!" I shook her, but she didn't respond. Her skin was cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. It was like she was in a trance. Her body there, but her mind gone. Jake grabbed my shoulder. "We need to get her out of here, man. Now." I nodded, but as I looked around, something else caught my eye. On the far wall, there was a door, slightly ajar, and behind it, I saw something moving. "Wait," I whispered, pointing toward the door. "There's something in there." Jake followed my gaze, his face pale. What is it? I don't know, but I think we need to see. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I walked toward the door. The hum of the machine grew louder with each step. I pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. And inside, it was Tommy. He was sitting at a desk, staring blankly at a computer screen. His eyes were glazed over, his expression empty. He didn't even blink as I walked in. "Tommy?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response. It was like he wasn't even there anymore. But then, slowly, he turned to look at me. His eyes locked on mine, and for a brief moment I saw something. Recognition. Fear. I wasn't sure, but then he opened his mouth, and in a voice that wasn't his own, he said, "It's too late. They know you're here." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake was behind me, pulling me out of the room. "We have to go. We have to leave now." We ran. I don't even remember how we got out of the facility, but we did. We carried Emily between us, her limp body barely responding as we stumbled through the woods. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The entire way back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something following us. But the woods were empty. When we finally reached the car, we threw Emily into the back seat and sped off, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The hum still echoed in my ears, the words Tommy had spoken playing over and over in my head. "They know you're here." We drove in silence for a while, both of us too shaken to speak. Emily was still out cold in the back seat, her breathing shallow but steady. We didn't know what they had done to her, or to Tommy. But we knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. We didn't make it far before things started to go wrong. It was like the facility had infected us, its presence still clinging to our minds, warping reality the further we drove. The road ahead stretched endlessly, the trees on either side becoming darker, more twisted, as if we were driving through some kind of nightmare. Emily hadn't woken up, and we were starting to worry. Jake kept checking her pulse, but she was still breathing, just trapped in whatever nightmare they'd put her in. I kept my eyes on the road, but in my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about Tommy's empty stare, his words. "They know you're here." I could feel it, deep in my bones. Something was coming for us. It was only a matter of time. "Do you hear that?" Jake's voice cut through the tense silence. At first, I thought he was just paranoid, but then I heard it too. A low, droning sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The hum from the facility. It had followed us. I pressed my foot harder on the gas, the car speeding up. The trees were nothing but blurs now, the road winding beneath us in long, endless stretches. But no matter how fast we went, the hum got louder. It was coming from everywhere, outside the car, inside my head, vibrating through the very air we breathed. "I can't take it anymore," Jake said, his voice shaking. "It's in my head, man. I feel like I'm forgetting things." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt the same. My thoughts were becoming muddled, memories slipping away like water through a sieve. I couldn't even remember what day it was, or what I'd had for breakfast that morning. My mind was unraveling. And then, the lights started to flicker. At first, it was just the dashboard, the glow of the dials sputtering in and out. But then the headlights began to dim, flickering like a dying bulb. My grip tightened on the wheel, heart racing as the road ahead plunged into intermittent darkness. "Keep going," Jake yelled, his voice breaking with fear. "I'm trying," I snapped. But the car was slowing down, no matter how hard I pressed on the gas. The hum was deafening now, filling every corner of my mind, drowning out everything else. I could barely think, barely remember why we were running in the first place. And then the car stopped. The engine cut out without warning, the headlights dying completely, plunging us into total darkness. We sat there, frozen, The only sound, that infernal hum, vibrating in our skulls. "We have to move," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here." I turned to look at him, but something was wrong. His face. It was changing, flickering like a bad signal on an old TV. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. His features blurred, his eyes hollow and vacant. And then, just as quickly, it was Jake again. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The erasure had begun. We scrambled out of the car, dragging Emily with us. The air outside was cold, biting into our skin as we stumbled through the dark. The trees seemed to close in around us, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The hum followed us, growing louder, more oppressive, like it was coming from the very ground beneath our feet. We didn't know where we were going. We just knew we had to keep moving. That's when the lights appeared. Bright, blinding beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping across the trees, searching. I could hear them now. Footsteps, voices, something mechanical in the distance. They were coming for us. Whoever, or whatever, they were, they'd found us. "Run!" Jake shouted, pulling Emily's limp body over his shoulder. We ran, the lights sweeping closer, the hum so loud now it felt like it was vibrating through my bones. My mind was slipping, memories flashing and disappearing like scattered pieces of a broken puzzle. I could barely remember why we were running, who we were even running from. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, my legs heavy, my thoughts even heavier. Then Jake tripped. I heard him hit the ground hard, Emily tumbling from his grasp. I stopped and turned back, my mind racing, but it was too late. The lights had found him. Jake was screaming, clawing at his head, his voice raw with panic. "I can't remember. I can't." His words cut off abruptly, his body convulsing on the ground. I tried to reach him, to pull him back, but the light was blinding, too bright to see through. And then just like that, he was gone. Not like he'd run off or been taken. Gone. 1 second he was there, and the next, the ground where he'd fallen was empty. No trace of him, no footprints, nothing. I was alone. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. I could still hear the hum, but now it wasn't just a sound. It was inside my head, erasing everything, wiping away pieces of my life. I couldn't even remember what my own name was anymore, or why I had come here in the first place. The lights were getting closer. I couldn't run anymore. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against a tree, my vision blurring. I could feel my memories slipping away, my thoughts unraveling into nothingness. It was like I was being erased from the inside out, piece by piece, memory by memory. And then, just as the lights reached me, everything went black. I woke up in my bed. At first, I thought it was a dream, a nightmare maybe, but something was wrong. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there. The room felt unfamiliar, the details of my life hazy and fragmented. I sat up, my heart pounding, but my mind was blank, like someone had wiped it clean. I looked around. No sign of Emily, no sign of Jake, no sign of anything. And then I saw it, on the bedside table, next to my phone. A Ouija board. It looked old, worn, the letters faded just like the one we'd used all those weeks ago. But this one was different. There was something etched into the wood, a single word that sent a chill down my spine. That's it. That's all I remember. I don't know how much time I have left before they come for me again, but I know one thing. Once you've been marked, once you've touched something from beyond this world, they never really let you go. The erasure never stops, and neither do they. You ever do something you know is a bad idea but do it anyway? That's what happened a few weeks ago, and honestly, I can't shake the feeling that it's far from over. It started out simple enough. Me, my girlfriend Kate, and our 2 friends Ethan and Liz, hanging out at my place on a Friday night. We didn't plan anything crazy, just some pizza, beer, and maybe a horror movie to finish off the night. Nothing unusual, right? But then Ethan showed up with this old Ouija board he said he found in an antique store. The thing looked ancient, like it hadn't been touched in years. Faded wood, worn out lettering. If I didn't know any better, I would have sworn it was cursed or something. We all laughed it off though. I mean, none of us really believed in that paranormal stuff. At least, not then. "Let's try it," Ethan suggested, with that stupid grin of his. "What's the worst that could happen?" I remember Kate rolling her eyes, but she didn't say no. And neither did I. Curiosity got the better of us, so we all gathered around my living room coffee table and set the board down. The room was dimly lit, just the glow from a few candles Kate insisted on lighting, making the whole thing feel way more serious than it should have. We all put our hands on the planchette. Ethan was being his usual self, cracking jokes about spirits and asking dumb questions like, "Is anyone out there who wants to haunt Jake's dirty laundry?" We didn't expect anything to happen. I mean, it's a board game, right? But after a few minutes, the planchette started moving. At first, I thought Ethan was messing with us. He's the type of guy who would push it just to freak us out. But the way he looked at us, wide-eyed and pale, I could tell it wasn't him. I don't think any of us were moving it. It glided slowly across the board, spelling out something that made my stomach drop. Leave. Kate pulled her hand back immediately. "Nope, I'm done. I don't like this." Liz was the next to back off, shaking her head. "This is creepy. Let's stop." But Ethan, he was too into it. He grinned like a madman and leaned in closer. "What do you mean, leave? Where are we supposed to go?" I was about to tell him to quit when the planchette moved again, faster this time. We all put our hands back on it, unable to resist, and it spelled out something that none of us could make sense of at first. GOTO 39.0724 N 77.2482W. I had no idea what that meant. It didn't spell out a word or anything, just numbers. But Ethan, of course, whipped out his phone and started typing them in. "It's coordinates," he said, as if that was supposed to explain everything. We waited as he punched them into Google Maps. The tension in the room felt thick, almost like we were suffocating under it. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, a random spot in the middle of the woods maybe, but what popped up on Ethan's screen made my heart race. It was a restricted government facility, like one of those places you hear about in conspiracy theories. No name, just a blank spot on the map with warnings plastered all over it. "No trespassing. Unauthorized personnel will be prosecuted." I laughed, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, okay. Sure. A haunted board game just gave us directions to Area 51. That's totally normal." But Ethan wasn't laughing. Neither was Kate, and Liz looked like she was about to bolt out the door. "I don't like this," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't funny, Jake." I shrugged, trying to shake off the unease. "It's just a game, babe. Probably some weird coincidence." But in the pit of my stomach, I couldn't help but feel like this wasn't just a game anymore. And Ethan, of course, had the bright idea to suggest we go check it out. "Come on, it's only a few hours away," he said, excitement flashing in his eyes like this was the best thing that had ever happened to him. "We'll drive out there, take a few pictures, and come right back. No one's gonna know." Kate immediately shot the idea down. "Are you insane? It's probably military. You could get shot for trespassing on a place like that." But Ethan wasn't backing down. He was practically bouncing with anticipation. "Come on, Jake, don't be a wuss." Liz was on the fence, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled about the idea either. Honestly, neither was I, but Ethan had this way of getting into your head, making even the dumbest ideas sound like an adventure you'd regret not going on. We all sat there in tense silence, the Ouija board still in front of us like some cursed artifact. And then, the weirdest thing happened. My phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was a random notification, but when I checked, there was no alert, just a blank screen. Then, Ethan's phone buzzed too. Same thing. And then Kate's and Liz's all at once. No messages, no missed calls. Just that eerie, vibrating silence. That's when I realized something had changed. It was like the room itself was watching us, waiting for what we'd do next. I wanted to say no. Every fibre in my body was screaming not to do it. But curiosity, mixed with the strange pull of those coordinates, won out in the end. "We'll go," I said finally, feeling the weight of my words settle in the room. "But we're coming right back. No messing around." Kate looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but she didn't argue. Neither did Liz. And Ethan? He just smiled. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We left early the next morning. It wasn't exactly a well-thought-out plan, more of a spontaneous, let's just get it over with kind of thing. Ethan showed up in his beat-up Jeep, practically buzzing with excitement. Kate sat in the passenger seat, quiet and tense, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Liz and I took the back, and honestly, I couldn't tell if Liz was more scared or annoyed that we were actually going through with this. It felt like a dumb idea. Scratch that. It was a dumb idea. But there was this pull. Like once we saw those coordinates on the map, none of us could let it go. That weird buzz on our phones from the night before still lingered in my mind. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a coincidence. Something about this felt wrong. But I didn't say anything. We were about 2 hours into the drive when things started getting weird. The road out there was empty, like deserted empty. No cars, no people, just miles and miles of barren highway and open fields. The GPS said we were still on the right path, but the landscape around us looked off. It was hard to explain. You know that feeling when you're somewhere familiar, but everything feels just slightly out of place? That's how the drive felt. "I don't like this," Kate mumbled, breaking the silence for the first time in hours. "Something's not right." I glanced out the window, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "It's just a remote area. We're probably near some military base or something. They don't want people out here." "That's exactly my point," she shot back, her voice sharper than usual. "Why are we here?" I didn't have an answer for her. None of us did. Ethan just kept his eyes on the road, his grip on the wheel tightening as we got closer. He wasn't laughing or joking anymore. I think, for the first time, even he was starting to realize this wasn't just a fun adventure. The GPS led us off the main highway onto a dirt road that snaked through a dense patch of forest. The trees loomed high, their branches tangling together overhead, blocking out most of the sunlight. It felt like the world was closing in around us, the silence growing heavier with every mile. "We should turn back," Liz said quietly, almost like she didn't want the trees to hear her. Ethan didn't respond. He just kept driving, eyes forward like he was in a trance. The road grew narrower, barely wide enough for the Jeep to pass through without scraping against the trees. My stomach was in knots, and I wasn't the only one. Kate was gripping the door handle so hard her knuckles were white, and Liz kept nervously glancing over her shoulder like she expected something or someone to jump out of the woods at any moment. Then, out of nowhere, the GPS cut out. The screen went blank, just a black void where the directions should have been. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, tapping the screen. It was working fine a minute ago. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but it was the same. No signal, no GPS, nothing. Liz tried hers too, but it was dead as well. We were completely cut off. "I'm serious. We need to go back," Liz said, her voice trembling. "This is insane. We don't even know where we are anymore." "We're close," Ethan replied, his voice eerily calm. "We can't turn back now." I didn't want to admit it, but something in me agreed with him. We were close. I could feel it, like an invisible line had already been crossed, and turning back wasn't an option anymore. The air felt heavier, colder, like it was pushing us forward. The road finally opened up into a clearing, and that's when we saw it. A chain-link fence stretched across the perimeter, topped with barbed wire that gleamed in the fading daylight. Beyond the fence, there were no buildings, no guards, just a massive, empty field that stretched out into the distance, disappearing into the horizon. It didn't look like a government facility, not really. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But something about it felt wrong. The weird part? There were no signs, no warnings, no keep out or restricted area. Just that fence, like it was waiting for us. "We shouldn't be here," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to leave, Jake. Right now. Right." Before I could respond, Ethan got out of the Jeep. He walked right up to the fence, peering through the gaps like he was looking for something, anything that would justify why we'd come all this way. "Ethan!" I called out, but he didn't turn around. Liz stayed in the car, her eyes darting nervously between the fence and the woods, like she expected someone to jump out and grab us at any second. I couldn't blame her. My skin was crawling with the sense that we weren't alone, even though the place seemed deserted. Ethan paced along the fence, his eyes glued to something on the other side. "Hey, come look at this!" he called out. Reluctantly, I got out of the Jeep and joined him. At first, I didn't see what he was talking about. It was just an empty field, right? But then, I noticed something in the distance, a faint shape, barely visible in the fading light. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a building. Maybe. "I think we should go," I said, my voice more unsteady than I'd like to admit. Ethan didn't move. "It's there for a reason, man. Something's here." That's when I heard it. A low, mechanical hum. Quiet at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It felt like it was vibrating in my chest, making my heart race. I spun around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Do you hear that?" Kate's voice was shaking now. Liz was already scrambling for the door handle, panic written all over her face. "We need to leave. Now!" But it was too late. The hum was deafening now, rattling the metal of the Jeep and making the ground beneath our feet feel unsteady. And then, the lights appeared. Bright, blinding spotlights from somewhere deep within the woods, sweeping across the clearing like searchlights. They moved with purpose, fast and deliberate, like they were looking for something, or someone. I didn't wait to see what they'd find. "Get in the car!" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the hum. "Now!" We all scrambled back into the Jeep, Ethan throwing it into reverse so fast the tires screeched against the dirt. The spotlights followed us as we sped back down the narrow road, the hum fading, but the feeling of being watched growing stronger with every mile. We didn't stop until we were miles away from that place, back on the main road, with the trees and the fence far behind us. None of us spoke. There wasn't anything to say. But as I glanced back at my phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on my blank screen, was a single notification. "You were warned." After we got back to town, things felt off. Not just with us, but with everything. It was like that place, whatever it was, hadn't let us go. It followed us back. I know how paranoid that sounds, but trust me, it wasn't just my imagination. The ride home was dead silent, and when we finally pulled into my driveway, everyone scrambled out of the Jeep without a word. Kate grabbed her things and headed straight to her car, barely looking at me as she said, "I need some time to think, Jake. This was... I don't even know." I wanted to stop her, to say something, but what was there to say? We messed with something we didn't understand, and now we were all feeling the weight of it. She wasn't the only one. Liz had practically bolted out of the car, muttering something about needing to call her parents, and Ethan. He just stood there, staring off into space like he was still trying to make sense of it all. When everyone finally left, I was alone. The house felt too quiet, too still. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something in the shadows, even though I was the only one home. That's when I noticed it. A black SUV parked across the street. Its tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but I could feel eyes on me. Someone was sitting in that car, watching. My skin prickled, and I quickly shut the door, locking it behind me. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence. Maybe a neighbor had a visitor or something. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise outside had me on edge. The wind rattling the windows, a distant car horn, even the creak of the old pipes in my house. Everything felt like it was closing in, like something was waiting just outside my door. The next morning, I woke up to find the SUV still there. Same spot, same eerie stillness. I called Ethan to see if he'd noticed anything weird, but he didn't pick up. I tried Liz next, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Finally, I called Kate, hoping she'd have some explanation, something that would make this all seem like it was just in my head. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight. "Jake, we need to talk." I felt my stomach drop. "What's going on? Did something happen?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, her voice shaky. "But I think someone's following me. I saw a black car parked outside my apartment this morning. Same one I saw last night when I left your place." My mouth went dry. "You're sure?" "Yeah. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but then I saw it again when I went out to get coffee. Jake, it's following me. I'm scared." That cold, creeping fear from the night before settled back into my chest. I told Kate to stay inside, lock her doors, and call me if anything else happened. Then I tried Ethan again. No answer. I grabbed my keys and headed straight to his place, trying to push down the growing dread in my gut. When I got there, his Jeep was parked outside, but something was wrong. His front door was wide open, hanging off the hinge like it had been kicked in. I froze on the porch, staring at the broken door. "Ethan!" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The inside of the house looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. But what caught my attention the most was Ethan's laptop, lying open on the coffee table, its screen still glowing faintly. There was something pulled up on the screen, something I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside and took a look. It was the GPS coordinates from the Ouija board. Ethan had been researching the area, digging deep into forums and conspiracy theory websites. But it wasn't just random speculation. He had found something. There were blurry satellite images, maps with the same coordinates marked in red, and long threads of people discussing secret military bases, cover-ups, and something called Project Blackout. It was all too much to process at once, but one detail stuck out to me. Everyone who posted about this place had disappeared. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly snapped the laptop shut and turned to leave. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the doorway. I froze, my blood running ice cold as I locked eyes with the man. He was tall, dressed in all black, his face obscured by a baseball cap and sunglasses. But I didn't need to see his eyes to know he was watching me. I could feel the weight of his stare, heavy and threatening. "Ethan's not here," he said in a voice that was unnervingly calm. "It would be best if you left too." I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them making sense. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the door. "It's not safe here. You should go." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. When I got back to my car, I could see the black SUV parked down the street again, watching, waiting. I sped home, my mind in a blur. Ethan was gone. The black cars were following us, and whoever that guy was, he knew something. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat in my living room, all the lights on, glancing at the windows every few seconds. The shadows outside seemed to move on their own, twisting and writhing like they were alive. But it was the silence that got to me the most, the deep, suffocating quiet that felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a blank screen. There was a single message. "Stop digging." I didn't reply. I didn't know what to do. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend this whole thing was just a nightmare I could wake up from. But deep down, I knew we'd already gone too far. We'd seen something we weren't supposed to see, and now there were people, or something, making sure we wouldn't talk. I wanted to call Kate, to warn her, but what could I even say? "Hey, remember that stupid Ouija board thing? Turns out we stumbled onto some government conspiracy, and now we're being stalked by men in black suits. Sorry about that." No, this was bigger than us, bigger than I could handle, and I had a feeling that whatever was coming next was going to be worse than I could imagine. The morning after that last message, I woke up to a chilling quiet. My house, usually filled with the background hum of life, birds outside, cars passing by, was dead silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, making you hyper-aware of every small creak and rustle. I could feel the weight of something watching me again, just like when I first saw that black SUV. Only this time, it felt even closer. My phone sat on the nightstand, taunting me with its blank screen. There had been no new messages since the last warning, but I knew it wasn't over. I needed to talk to Kate. I needed to know she was okay. I dialed her number, praying she'd pick up. After a few rings, her voice came through, but something was wrong. She sounded frantic, her words spilling out so fast I could barely keep up. "Jake, they were outside my apartment. The same black SUV you saw. It's been there all night." I clenched my fists. "Did they do anything? Did they try to get inside?" "No, but that's not the worst part," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I tried calling Ethan again this morning and... Jake, I think he's gone." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean, gone?" "His phone's disconnected. I called his job, and they said he hasn't shown up. When I drove by his house, there were movers packing everything up. It's like he never existed." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Ethan, who had always been larger than life, suddenly erased. It didn't make sense. But then again, none of this did. The Ouija board, the coordinates, the strange men in black. It all felt like a twisted puzzle I couldn't put together. "I don't know what to do," Kate continued. "I'm scared, Jake." "We're going to figure this out," I told her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But whatever you do, stay inside. Don't talk to anyone you don't know. I'm coming over." When I hung up, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, half expecting to see the black SUV parked outside. But it wasn't there. Instead, the street was eerily empty, like everyone had decided to vanish along with Ethan. As I drove toward Kate's place, the sense of dread only grew. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, how someone could just disappear like that, how his whole life could be wiped clean. My mind kept going back to the coordinates, to that fence, and to the blinding lights that had chased us away. What if this wasn't just about us snooping around where we didn't belong? What if it was about something far worse, something they were protecting? I pulled into Kate's driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. Her apartment was quiet, the curtains drawn tight like she was trying to block out the world. I hurried to the door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Kate, it's me. Open up." Still nothing. My pulse quickened. I called her phone, listening as it rang from behind the door. When the ringing stopped, her voicemail kicked in. I tried again and again. No response. Panic clawed at me as I jiggled the doorknob, hoping it was just stuck or maybe she was in the shower or something. But when the door finally gave way, I knew right away that something was horribly wrong. The apartment was empty. Not just empty in the sense that no one was home. It was completely empty. No furniture, No pictures on the walls, no dishes in the sink. The place had been stripped bare, like Kate had never lived there at all. My heart sank into my stomach. I wandered through the rooms in a daze, calling her name, knowing it was useless. Her clothes, her books, everything was gone. Even the faint smell of her perfume that used to linger in the hallways was gone, replaced by a sterile, unsettling void. I stumbled into the bedroom, feeling like I was going to be sick. That's when I noticed something on the floor. A small scrap of paper, crumpled and torn, lying where her bed should have been. I picked it up, hands trembling. It was a note, in Kate's handwriting. "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't have a choice. They're watching." I stood there, the note clutched in my hand, my mind spinning. What did that even mean? Who were these people? And why had Kate vanished like Ethan? Were they being silenced, or worse? Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my thoughts. I fumbled to pull it out, half expecting another ominous message, but this time it was Liz. I answered immediately. "Liz, thank God! They're outside my house." She cut me off, her voice shaking with terror. "Jake, there are people in suits. They're just standing there, watching me. What do I do?" "Lock your doors. Don't let them in." My mind raced as I spoke. "I'm coming over. Stay on the phone with me until I get there." Liz's breathing was shallow, panicked. "What's happening, Jake? What did we do?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that this thing, whatever it was coming for all of us. First Ethan, now Kate, and Liz was next. They weren't just watching us anymore. They were moving in. I sped through town, breaking every traffic law in the book, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I neared Liz's street, I saw them. The men in black suits, standing by the curb in front of her house, perfectly still. Their faces were blank, emotionless, as they stared up at her window. I parked a block away, not wanting to get too close. I didn't know what these people were capable of, but something told me confronting them head-on wasn't a good idea. I needed to get to Liz without drawing attention. I circled around to the back of her house, ducking through neighbours' yards and creeping through the bushes until I reached her back door. It was locked, but I could see Liz's terrified face through the kitchen window. Her eyes were wide, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the latch. I slipped inside, my pulse racing. "We need to go," I whispered. "Now!" Liz grabbed her keys and we headed toward the back door, but before we could leave, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Someone had entered through the front. My heart stopped. "They're here!" Liz whispered, her face pale with fear. We froze, listening as the footsteps grew closer, deliberate and slow, like they knew exactly where we were. There was no time to run, no time to hide. We were trapped. I glanced around the room looking for something, anything that could help. But before I could move, the door to the kitchen creaked open and a shadow filled the doorway. It was one of them. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face hidden behind dark glasses, staring at us with an expression so empty it sent a chill down my spine. I felt Liz's hand tighten around mine, and for a moment, everything went still. It was like time had stopped. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. Then, without warning, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the distance until the house was silent again. I didn't wait to see if he was coming back. I grabbed Liz's hand and we bolted out the back door, not stopping until we were far away from the house, from the street, from everything. As we ran, my phone buzzed in my pocket once more. Another message. "You're next." I'm not sure when we stopped running, but by the time we did, Liz and I were gasping for air, hunched over on some dark side street miles from her house. The city lights flickered weakly in the distance, but where we stood, everything was shrouded in an unsettling silence. It felt like the world had shifted, like we'd stepped into some place that didn't exist on any map. "They're not going to stop," Liz whispered, her voice hoarse, barely more than a breath. Are they? I didn't know how to answer. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Ethan, Kate, and now us, whatever we'd stumbled onto. It was bigger than just a stupid Ouija board game. Bigger than a few curious kids poking around where they didn't belong. I could feel it. This was the kind of thing people vanished for. The kind of thing that didn't leave loose ends. We can't keep running, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to know what's going on. If we don't figure it out... I stopped myself, realizing how futile it sounded. But deep down, I knew I was right. They weren't just watching anymore. They were closing in. We had to confront it head on. There's someone we haven't tried yet, Liz said suddenly, her eyes wide. What about Ethan's laptop? You said he was looking into the coordinates, right? Maybe there's something there that can help us. She was right. Ethan had been digging deeper than any of us, connecting the dots in ways we hadn't even begun to understand. Maybe there was something in his files, something we missed that could explain why all of this was happening. I nodded, trying to push down the fear gnawing at my insides. We'll have to go back to his place, I said, not liking the idea, but knowing it was our only shot. So we went. By the time we pulled up to Ethan's street, the whole neighborhood was blanketed in an eerie stillness. His house was dark, like it had been abandoned for years instead of just days. I half expected the black SUVs to be parked outside, but the street was empty. It was like they didn't need to watch us anymore, like they already knew what we were going to do. We crept inside, the broken door still hanging from its hinge. The mess from before was still there, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. But there was something else, something that hadn't been there the last time I was here. A faint, high-pitched buzzing sound coming from the living room. Liz and I exchanged a nervous glance and followed the noise. It was Ethan's laptop, sitting on the coffee table, the screen flickering with static. The image was faint, barely there, but as we approached, we could make out a video feed. It was shaky, grainy, but unmistakable. A figure in a dark suit, standing outside a house. Watching, waiting. "What is this?" Liz whispered, her voice trembling. "Is this live?" I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The feed cut in and out, but I recognized the street, the house. It was my house. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. They were there, right now, at my home, waiting for me. The realization hit me like a freight train. There was no escaping this, no running, no hiding. They had already anticipated everything. We were playing right into their hands. "We need to leave," Liz said, her voice urgent. "We can't go back there, Jake." I wanted to agree, to bolt out the door and drive as far away as possible, but something held me in place. Ethan's files, the research he'd been doing. It had to be here. I quickly grabbed the laptop, flipping through his documents, searching for anything that could make sense of this nightmare. There, buried deep in a folder labeled Project Blackout, was a series of encrypted files. I didn't know what half of them meant, but one file stood out, a document titled The Signal. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, opening the file. Inside was a detailed report on a signal, an ultrasonic frequency that had been detected near government facilities all over the country. The document described it as a kind of control mechanism, something that could interfere with the brain's natural processes, heightening fear, inducing paranoia. And according to the report, the signal had been active at the coordinates we'd visited. "They've been messing with us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That place, the fence, it wasn't just some random government facility. They're using it. They're testing something." Liz was pacing now, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "So they're experimenting on us? Is that what you're saying? This whole thing was some kind of test?" I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around it. "Not just us. I think they've been doing this for years, using this signal to control people, make them paranoid, terrified. It's why we felt like we were being watched. Why everything feels wrong. They've been amplifying it." Liz stopped pacing, her face pale. And what happens if we keep digging? I didn't need to answer. We both knew the truth. The deeper we went, the more dangerous it became. Ethan had dug too deep, and now he was gone. Kate had been silenced. We were next. Before we could say anything else, the front door slammed open with a deafening crash. We froze, the air sucked out of the room. My heart raced as I turned to see two men in black suits stepping inside, their expressions cold and detached. There was no anger, no urgency in their movements, just a terrifying calmness that made my skin crawl. "We warned you," one of them said, his voice low and measured. "You should have stopped." Liz backed away, her eyes wide with terror. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small device, no bigger than a cell phone. He pressed a button, and that same low hum we'd heard back at the fence filled the room, vibrating in our bones. I collapsed to the floor, my head spinning as the sound grew louder, unbearable. My vision blurred, my thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. Liz was screaming, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. The signal. They were using it again, right here, right now. But this time, there was no fence, no lights, just us, trapped in that house, our minds unraveling under the pressure. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the man's voice, calm and cold as ever. This is what happens when you don't listen. When I woke up, I was alone. The house was empty. Liz was gone. The men were gone. Everything was gone. I stumbled outside, the early morning light burning my eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message. "Forget what you saw. This is your final warning." I looked around, half expecting to see the black SUVs, the men in suits, but there was nothing. The street was quiet, ordinary, except it wasn't. Because now I knew what was out there, what they were capable of, and I knew they were watching me. I never saw Liz or Kate or Ethan again. Their names weren't on any missing persons lists. It was like they had never existed at all. As for me, I've learned to live with the silence, the feeling of eyes always on me. I stopped trying to figure it out, stopped digging, because I know if I push too far again, they'll come back, and this time, they won't give me another chance. It all started as a joke, something to pass the time on a lazy Friday night. My friends, Jake, Tommy and I, were hanging out at Jake's place. You know how it goes. Order some pizza, watch a movie, and just chat about random stuff. It was supposed to be one of those nights, just a way to kill time. But Tommy had different plans. Tommy, always the one with the wild ideas, suddenly pulled out a Ouija board. I didn't even know he had one, let alone planned on using it that night. "Guys, let's do something fun," he said, his eyes glinting with that mischievous energy he always had. "Ever wonder what it's like to actually talk to someone from the other side?" I rolled my eyes. Jake laughed. But hey, we were bored, and the idea didn't sound too bad at the time. So we set it up on Jake's coffee table, pushing aside the leftover pizza and soda cans. "I don't know, man," I said, trying to act cool but feeling a little uneasy. "These things are fake, like we all know one of us is just going to push the planchette around." Tommy smirked. Maybe not, but let's see." So there we were, fingers lightly placed on the planchette. The lights were dimmed, the room quiet except for the faint hum of Jake's refrigerator. It felt eerie, but none of us wanted to admit it. "All right, who do we want to talk to?" Tommy asked. "Someone cool," Jake joked, "like a dead celebrity or something." But before we could even joke more about it, Tommy's face suddenly became serious. "What about someone who's lost?" he asked quietly. "Like, really lost." That's when Jake said it. What about a NASA astronaut? One of those guys who just disappeared, you know? We all looked at him, surprised. Dude, what? I laughed nervously. That's weirdly specific. Think about it, Jake continued, his voice lowering as if he was getting spooked by his own idea. Space is the ultimate unknown. What if one of them is still out there, lost? It sounded crazy, but we went with it. Why not? It was just a game, right? Tommy cleared his throat and began. If there is anyone out there, anyone who is lost, who never made it home, we're trying to reach you. If you can hear us, give us a sign. We all waited. Seconds ticked by. Nothing. I was just about to crack a joke when the planchette jerked under our fingers. At first, we all thought one of us had moved it, but I could feel the tension in the air shift. It wasn't a hard movement, just a slight nudge. But it was enough to make us sit up straight. Who's doing that? I asked, my voice sounding more strained than I intended. Nobody, Tommy whispered. Shut up and keep going. We watched as the planchette started moving again, this time more deliberately. It slid over to the letters A, then N, then T. My heart started beating a little faster. Ant? The planchette paused for a second, almost like it was waiting for us to catch up. Then it moved again. A! R! C! Jake gasped. Antarctica! We all froze, staring at each other. I had a knot forming in my stomach, and I could tell from the look on their faces that Jake and Tommy were feeling it too. This wasn't some random message. It was intentional. Keep going, Jake said, his voice quieter now. Let's see what else. The planchette continued to move. It spelled out a name. C-O-L. Colonel? Tommy guessed. No, Jake said, his eyes wide. Collins. Michael Collins. He was on Apollo 11, but he never disappeared, man. No way, I muttered, my throat dry. This can't be real. But the board didn't stop. It continued, spelling out words faster now. Danger. Stay away. Stay away from what? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. What is the danger? The planchette shot across the board, almost aggressively. It spelled out a single word. Antarctica. I pulled my fingers off the board. This is getting too weird, man. One of you is messing with us. But Tommy was pale, his eyes glued to the board. I swear, I'm not doing anything. Jake's voice wavered. Okay. So if this really is someone, why Antarctica? What's there? For a moment, the planchette didn't move. The room was dead silent, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Then, slowly, it began to spell again. This time, it was chilling. L-O-S-T. That was it. Just one word. Lost. I could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I didn't know what to think. It didn't make sense. Why would a lost astronaut be warning us about Antarctica? Jake broke the silence. I think we should stop. But Tommy wasn't having it. No, wait, he said, his voice desperate. Just one more question. He looked at the board, his face stern. Who are you? The planchette slid one more time, spelling out a final word before going still. M-A-J-O-R. Major. What did that mean? Jake stood up, shaking his head. I'm done, man. This is freaky. And just like that, the game was over. We packed the board away, but the uneasiness lingered. None of us could explain what had just happened, but the name, Major, kept replaying in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the word Antarctica, and the warning felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. What was in Antarctica? Why was a lost astronaut warning us to stay away? Little did we know, this was only the beginning. The next morning, none of us wanted to talk about what happened. We all pretended it was just a stupid game, something to laugh off. But deep down, I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just a joke anymore. I could tell Jake was still freaked out. He hadn't said much since the Ouija board spelled out Antarctica, and when I asked if he was okay, he brushed it off with a half-hearted smile. Tommy, on the other hand, was acting like nothing happened, but I caught him stealing glances at his phone throughout the day. He was researching something. I could feel it. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence in my room felt heavier than usual. The air had that thick, suffocating stillness, the kind that made me acutely aware of every tiny sound, every creak in the walls, every rustle of the trees outside. I kept thinking about the name, Major. What did it mean? Who was this lost astronaut, and why did he care about Antarctica? Around midnight, I finally gave in and grabbed my phone. Curiosity had been gnawing at me all day. I typed NASA astronaut lost Antarctica into Google. At first, the results were the usual articles about space missions, nothing related to what we experienced. But then, buried deep in the search results, I found something strange. It was an old forum, one of those obscure conspiracy sites that felt like a relic of the early internet. There was a thread titled, "The Missing Mission, NASA's Secret Involvement in Antarctica." My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on it. The post was old, from years ago, and written by someone named Cold Truth. They claimed that NASA had been involved in a secret mission to Antarctica in the late 90s. According to the post, the mission wasn't just scientific, it was classified. The goal? To investigate an anomaly detected deep beneath the ice. The poster went on to say that one of the astronauts on the mission had gone missing, but there was no official record of him. He wasn't listed on any public mission logs. The poster claimed the astronaut's name was Major Thomas Briggs, and he was presumed dead. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Could this be the Major we contacted through the Ouija board? I didn't want to believe it, but the coincidences were too strange. I scrolled further down the page. Buried in the comments section, someone had linked a video, grainy footage that looked like it had been ripped from some old VHS tape. It was titled, "NASA Transmission Number 1023, Last Known Recording of Major Briggs." My finger hovered over the play button. Every instinct in me screamed to stop, to close the page and pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity won, as it always does. The video started with static. Slowly, an image came into focus. An astronaut, standing in what looked like a barren, snow-covered landscape. The timestamp in the corner said it was filmed in 1998, but the quality was terrible, like it had been recorded off an old TV screen. The astronaut, Briggs, I assumed, was breathing heavily, his voice crackling through the transmission. I don't know how much longer I can stay out here," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. They lied. They lied about everything. Antarctica. It's not what they told us." He paused, his gloved hand trembling as it reached for the camera. "If anyone finds this, stay away. Don't come here. There's something underneath the ice. We were never supposed to find it." The video cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but static. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. What had Briggs seen? What was he talking about? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some conspiracy theory. It felt real, too real. I sent the link to Jake and Tommy in a group chat, hoping they'd see it in the morning. But Tommy replied almost immediately. "I've been looking into it too," his message read. "Meet me at Jake's tomorrow. We need to talk." The next day, I headed over to Jake's place, feeling an odd mix of excitement and dread. When I arrived, Tommy already had his laptop open, various articles and images pulled up. Jake looked pale, sitting quietly on the couch, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. "I found something," Tommy said, his voice low and serious. He spun the laptop around to show me the screen. It was a map of Antarctica, but not the kind you'd find in a textbook. This one was covered in red dots, each marking a point of interest. At the center of the map was a massive structure, hidden deep within the ice. It's called Station 47, Tommy explained. It's an abandoned research station, officially decommissioned in 1995. But according to some old documents I found, it was active long after that. And guess who was stationed there? Briggs? Jake asked quietly. Tommy nodded. Exactly. He wasn't just an astronaut. He was part of a team investigating something buried deep under the ice. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. What did they find? Tommy hesitated. I don't know for sure, but whatever it was, they never made it back, and the government covered it up. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This is insane, man. Are we really buying into this? I don't know, I admitted. But that video, it felt real. Tommy leaned forward, his eyes intense. We need to go deeper. There's more to this, I'm sure of it. As much as I wanted to laugh it off, to call Tommy crazy, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were onto something dangerous. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wanted to know more. We all agreed to keep digging, to find out what had really happened to Major Briggs, and why he was warning us about Antarctica. But part of me wondered if we were getting in over our heads. The further we went down this rabbit hole, the more I felt like we were uncovering something we were never meant to see. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the warning. Stay away. But what if it was too late for that? What if, by contacting Briggs, we had already crossed a line we couldn't come back from? And then I heard it. The faint sound of static, crackling through the speakers of my phone. I hadn't played the video again, but somehow, it was still there, replaying in my head. Or was it something else? Something trying to reach me? I turned my phone off and lay in the dark, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Antarctica, Briggs, the warning. It was all connected, and whatever we had tapped into, it wasn't done with us yet. We had only scratched the surface. The deeper we went into our investigation, the more I wished we had never touched that Ouija board. Whatever we had contacted wasn't just a lost soul. It was something far more unsettling. Something that had been waiting for someone like us to come along, stupid enough to reach out. Jake, Tommy and I agreed to meet again the next evening, but something strange happened before we could even sit down to plan. I was heading home from work when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have watched that video. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk staring at the screen. I hadn't told anyone outside our group about the video, and as far as I knew, the video wasn't even public. I quickly texted back, asking who it was, but no response, just silence. I shook it off, trying to convince myself it was just a prank, someone messing with me, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me all the way home. That night I kept hearing strange noises outside my window, faint, shuffling sounds, like someone was walking around outside. Every time I got up to look, there was nothing. Just the wind. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The next day, I arrived at Jake's place, feeling more paranoid than ever. When I told him and Tommy about the text, they exchanged uneasy glances. "You're not gonna believe this," Tommy said, pulling out his phone. "I got the same message last night." Jake nodded, pulling out his own phone to show us an identical message. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever, or whatever, we had reached through the Ouija board knew we were digging too deep. "I think we need to stop," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. "We don't know what we're messing with." But Tommy wasn't ready to let it go. "We're already in this, man. Stopping now won't change anything. We need to find out what's really going on." I didn't say anything, but deep down, I agreed with Jake. This was getting out of hand. But Tommy had a point too. If we stopped now, would it really make any difference? Whatever was happening had already started, and I wasn't sure it was something we could just walk away from. Tommy had spent the night diving deeper into the conspiracy forums. He showed us several more threads that talked about Antarctica and NASA's secret missions. One of the most chilling ones detailed a theory about an underground base beneath the ice, where strange experiments were conducted. The poster claimed that scientists had found something ancient, something not from this world, and that whatever they discovered had been locked away until now. "It's all connected," Tommy said, his voice low. "Briggs, Antarctica, the Ouija board. This thing wants us to know the truth." I wasn't so sure. The text message had rattled me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Like every time we talked about Antarctica or Briggs, there was someone, or something, listening. That night, after we parted ways, I noticed something odd as I walked to my car. The street was unusually quiet, and the air had that strange stillness again, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I glanced around, feeling like someone was watching me, but there was no one there, at least, no one I could see. As I got into my car, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. It was just a shadow, a figure standing at the far end of the street, barely visible in the dim streetlight. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make out any details. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. Maybe it was just my imagination, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't so sure. When I got home, I double-checked all the locks on my doors and windows, feeling more paranoid than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was out there, watching. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but then I heard it again. A faint, rhythmic tapping. My eyes snapped open, and I lay there, frozen, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my window. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud it felt like it was echoing through the room. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone was tapping, on the glass. Summoning all the courage I could, I slowly turned my head to look at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a faint silhouette behind them. My breath caught in my throat. Someone, or something, was standing outside my window. I wanted to scream, to bolt out of bed and run, but I was paralyzed by fear. The tapping continued, slow and persistent, like it was trying to get my attention. I didn't move. I just stared at the window, waiting for it to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tapping ceased. The silhouette lingered for a moment longer before it disappeared into the darkness. I lay there, wide awake, the silence more terrifying than the tapping had been. I knew I should check outside, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Not yet. The next morning, I went outside, trying to find any trace of what, or who, had been outside my window. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. But I knew what I had seen. I wasn't imagining it. I called Tommy and Jake, telling them about the tapping. They didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy. Instead, Tommy seemed more determined than ever. "We're being followed," he said. "They don't want us to keep looking into this." Jake's voice cracked on the other end of the line. "I'm done, man. This is getting way too real." But Tommy wouldn't stop. He had found something else, something that might explain what was really going on in Antarctica. There was another video, hidden deep within the forums, one that hadn't been watched by many. It was titled, "Briggs' Final Message." I didn't want to watch it. I didn't want to keep going. But something inside me, curiosity, fear, maybe both, pushed me forward. We agreed to meet again, one last time, to watch the video together. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but glance at the window. The memory of that silhouette still haunted me. The tapping on the glass still echoed in my mind. I had a sinking feeling that whatever we were about to uncover, it was going to be far worse than we had imagined. And I wasn't sure if we were ready for what was coming. By the time we met again at Jake's place, the tension between us was palpable. None of us had slept well. and the weight of whatever we had gotten ourselves into was starting to show. Jake looked even paler than before, dark circles under his eyes like he'd been up all night. Tommy, always the one pushing us forward, had an unusual edge to him, less excited, more anxious. "I found it," Tommy said quietly, pulling his laptop out of his bag. "The last video." Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us wanted to see it, but at this point, curiosity was pulling us deeper into the abyss. We gathered around Tommy's laptop and he clicked play. The screen flickered to life with static, just like the first video. But this one felt different. The air in the room seemed to grow colder as the image slowly came into focus. It was Briggs again, or at least we assumed it was. He was inside a dimly lit room, maybe inside the research station we had read about. His helmet was off, and his face looked gaunt, almost unrecognizable from the previous video. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with fear, glancing around the room like something was in there with him. "They didn't tell us everything?" Briggs whispered, his voice trembling. "Antarctica. It's not just a continent. It's a doorway. Something is buried here. Something old." He paused, staring straight into the camera, and for a moment, I felt like he was looking right at us. "We weren't supposed to find it." The video shook as Briggs seemed to turn toward the door, listening to something outside. His face grew even more terrified, and he leaned closer to the camera. "If anyone is listening, don't come here. Don't look for me. Don't..." There was a loud bang, and the video cut out for a moment, static filling the screen. When it came back, the image was shaky, like someone was holding the camera while running. The view panned wildly as Briggs bolted down a narrow corridor, the walls slick with ice and frost. His breathing was ragged, and in the background there was a sound, a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. Whatever was chasing him wasn't human. Briggs stumbled, the camera tumbling to the ground. For a moment, all we could see was a blur of movement, but then the camera steadied, and what we saw next made my blood run cold. There, in the distance, was a shadow, massive, distorted, and unnatural. It moved with a slow, deliberate pace, but its form was wrong. Too many limbs, too tall, like something out of a nightmare. It wasn't human, and it wasn't anything I had ever seen before. Briggs' voice came through again, barely a whisper. "They lied. They lied about everything. It's awake." We woke it up. The shadow grew closer, and the camera flickered again, cutting out as Briggs screamed. Then, nothing. The screen went black. The silence in the room was suffocating. None of us spoke for what felt like hours. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the same gnawing sense of dread from the Ouija board now fully realized. This wasn't just some conspiracy theory. It was real. Whatever had been buried beneath Antarctica wasn't meant to be found. Jake was the first to break the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. What the hell was that?" Tommy closed the laptop, his hands shaking. "I don't know, but whatever Briggs found down there, it's still there. And it's alive." I could see the fear in Tommy's eyes, the same fear I felt in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't something we could just walk away from. We had seen too much. We knew too much. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tommy ran a hand through his hair, looking more lost than I had ever seen him. "I don't know, man. I thought we were just uncovering some government cover-up. But this is something else. Something we shouldn't be messing with." Jake stood up, pacing around the room, his hands clenched into fists. "I told you guys. I told you we should have stopped. But now what? Do we just forget this ever happened? Pretend we didn't see it?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. That night, as I drove home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure from the video lurking behind me. Every streetlight cast long, ominous shadows, and the air felt thick with something I couldn't explain. The paranoia was eating away at me, and every sound, Every flicker of movement made my heart race. When I got home, I locked the door and sat in the dark, staring at my phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore, that whatever we had uncovered was watching us now, waiting. It was around midnight when my phone buzzed again. Another message from that unknown number. "You should have listened. It's too late now." I stared at the message, my blood turning to ice. My hands shook as I typed a reply, asking who it was, but there was no response, just silence. I felt trapped, like there was no way out of this. Then, the lights in my apartment flickered, just for a second, but long enough to send a jolt of fear through me. I got up, checking the windows and doors again, but everything was locked. I stood there in the dark, listening, waiting for something to happen. And that's when I heard it, the tapping. The same slow, deliberate tapping from the night before, coming from the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face it. There, in the faint light from outside, I saw it. A figure standing just outside the glass, barely visible through the curtain. But it wasn't human. It was too tall, too distorted, just like the thing we had seen in the video. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like it was demanding my attention. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the figure to move, but it didn't. It just stood there, watching. My phone buzzed again. "It's awake, and it's coming for you." The figure outside the window vanished, melting into the shadows as if it had never been there. But I knew it was real. I knew it was coming. We had opened a door we were never meant to open. And now, whatever was on the other side was coming through. We weren't just dealing with some lost astronaut. We had woken something up. Something ancient. Something that didn't belong in this world. And I had a sickening feeling that we had only just begun to understand the true horror of what was coming next. The next day felt like walking through a fog. I barely slept, too rattled by the tapping, the figure, and that final message. My mind was racing, replaying everything over and over. That video of Briggs running, the shadow behind him, the warnings. We had stepped into something we didn't understand, something far beyond our control. I couldn't just sit around and wait for it to come to me, whatever it was. I needed answers, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. Jake and Tommy must have felt the same way because when I suggested we meet again, neither hesitated. When I arrived at Jake's place, the mood was different. Darker. Jake had barely said 2 words since the video, and now he sat in the corner, staring at his phone like he was expecting something, or someone. Tommy, who was usually the loudest in the room, was unnervingly quiet, his face pale and drawn. "I think we've gone too far," Jake muttered, almost to himself. "We need to stop. We need to leave this alone." Tommy shook his head, though there was no confidence left in his voice. "We can't stop. Not now. It's too late. It's already found us." I knew Tommy was right. Whatever we'd woken up, whatever Briggs had warned us about, it was out there, and it wasn't going to just leave us alone. But what could we do? We were just 3 guys who'd made a stupid mistake with a Ouija board. As we sat in silence, Tommy's laptop dinged. He shot up, his eyes wide. A new message had popped up in the dark web forum he'd been scouring. It was from someone named Frozen Eyes. The message was short, but it sent a chill through my entire body. "I see it too. You're not alone. It's watching all of us." Before we could react, the lights in Jake's apartment flickered, casting long, unsettling shadows across the walls. We all froze, staring at each other, waiting for the power to come back. When the lights finally steadied, there was another sound, something scratching at the front door. It was faint at first, but it quickly grew louder, more frantic. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Tommy stood, moving toward the door, his hand shaking as he reached for the doorknob. "Don't," I warned. my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't listen. Tommy opened the door, and for a moment, everything was still. The hallway outside was empty, just the faint hum of the apartment building's electricity and the soft drip of a leaky faucet somewhere in the distance. But something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Then I saw it, just a flicker, barely noticeable at first. A shadow in the far corner of the hallway, not moving, just standing there. It was tall, too tall, its shape distorted, like it didn't belong in this world. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could say anything, Tommy slammed the door shut. "It's here," he whispered, backing away from the door, his face pale as death. "It's outside." Jake bolted up from his chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "What do we do? What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Every fibre of my being screamed to run, to get as far away as possible. But where could we go? This thing, whatever it was, had followed us from the moment we first touched that Ouija board. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the window. We all turned, and there, standing just outside the glass, was the figure. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was pressed against the window, twisted and grotesque. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids, and its mouth stretched too wide, as if it were grinning at us. Jake let out a choked scream, stumbling backward. Oh God, it's here! It's here!" The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared, that awful, unnatural grin, locked in place. And then it started tapping again. Slow, deliberate, just like before. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away from the window, my entire body trembling with fear. Tommy grabbed the laptop and typed a frantic message back to Frozen Eyes. What do we do? How do we stop it? For a moment, nothing happened. The tapping continued, louder and louder, as if the thing outside was trying to break through the glass. Then finally, a reply appeared on the screen. "You can't stop it. It's been waiting for too long. The only thing you can do now is hide, and pray it doesn't find you." The lights flickered again, and suddenly the window cracked. A thin spiderweb of fractures spread across the glass, as if the tapping was becoming too much for it to handle. Jake let out a panicked sob, running for the door, but Tommy grabbed his arm. "Don't! If we run, it'll just follow us." Jake was shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with terror. "What do we do, man? What do we do?" Before any of us could react, the window shattered, glass exploding inward. The figure was gone, but we knew better than to think we were safe. It wasn't gone. It was inside now. The air in the room grew colder, and I could hear something moving. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the apartment, even though there was no one there. My breath hitched, and I realized it was coming for us. It was inside, somewhere in the shadows, and it was coming for us. Tommy grabbed his phone, frantically dialing 911, but before he could hit call, the screen went black. All our phones did. The lights flickered again, and the room plunged into darkness. Then, from the shadows, I heard a voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Briggs, the astronaut. "You shouldn't have come here. It's too late. You've opened the door." And that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was the figure, its hollow eyes fixed on us, its twisted grin wider than ever. It was here, and there was no stopping it. We had opened a door that should have stayed closed. We had reached out to something that wasn't meant to be found, and now it had found us. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of that tapping, slow, deliberate, echoing in my mind. Tap, tap, tap.